Today we will study about the Cold War era. So in this chapter we will study what is Cold War, how it started, its origination, and some of the key events happened during the Cold War like Berlin blockade, Korean War, Cuban Missile Crisis. These important political episodes we will study and understand how it's impacted the Cold War and what are the formation of alliances and how these alliances were formed during the Cold War period and what India's role during the Cold War period and the policy of one of the very important policy of non-alignment movement. So all this we will study in this unit. So let's begin with this topic of Cold War. First about the timeline when Cold War started. So the geography, this geopolitical tension was started after the Second World War from 1947 to 1991. This era is called Cold War era. So a lot of things started in this, like ideological rivalry, proxy wars, nuclear arm race, and these things changed the whole political world, and a lot of global political changes were started after that period. Now let's come with the next slide. Definition of the Cold War. Why it's called Cold War? First, we need to think about this. This this war is called Cold War because with the starting of this war period, there was no direct clash between the US and USSR, both indirectly trying to cut out each other. So there was no direct arm raised against each other, and there was no direct war confrontation from the both sides. So this was one of the reason why it's called Cold War also, and why Cold War started. So first we need to understand that it was firstly an ideological differences, or we can say an ideological rivalry that led to the Cold War, because US was a capitalist nation and a pro-democratic and so-called pro-democratic country that advocates for the democracy and all these things, and other side the USSR, or we can say Soviet Union, promotes communism or socialism. There was no concepts of capitalism, or they are totally against the capitalist ideology. So and both of these superpowers tried to impose, or we can say expand, their ideology in the whole world, because they are the two most big power remain after the two world war. So trying to overcome, both of these power trying to overcome each other, and this ideological rivalry led to the path of Cold War. In this Cold War we witnessed a lot of nuclear arm race was also started between the USA and USA and USSR. Rapid acceleration of nuclear weapon, a lot of new nuclear arsenals and new military equipments were invented during this time period, and production of these nuclear arsenal were also increased during Cold War phase. So this has also created a danger for whole human society or whole human breed. So this all thing in Cold War. Now let's come to the next slide. What is the origination of the Cold War? How it started? Firstly, we need to understand this. So after the Second World War, there is a political vacuum, we can say, because all the important powers like Italy, Germany, France, or all these powers now, Britain, they are not that much powerful after the Second World War, because a long series of war witnessing impacted their economy and political structure of their countries. So only two power were remain. That was big power came in forefront, that is USA and USSR. This political vacuum, they tried to, even USA tried to cover, and USSR also tried to capture this political vacuum. So this ideological differences started after Second World War, 1945. An ideological divide, I already mentioned you how this also led to the war. And Soviet expansion, because Soviet Union always has an ideology, we can say a national ideology, that Soviet Union always wanted to expand its territory. Although Russia is even today Russia is the most of the most largest country, but even that time also that Soviet Union trying to expand their ideology like communism, they tried to impose socialist ideology. Even India had impact of socialist ideology, even Nehru had an impact of socialist vision. So that was also creating a danger for USA. If socialism will expand, so what about how will capitalism will sustain? So this difference between these countries also led to the war. And the next is the US contaminant policy. This policy of USSA totally against the Soviet Union interests. So these all the clashes, these are four were the origination, or we can say the most important reason for the world war. Even though during world war Russia and USA came together, or we can say they somehow try to balance power, but later on after the world war things started changing. So we can say this the world war emerged from the ashes of second world war. So these things were started, and a lot of suspension from the US side or USSR side were started. Both are not ready to trust each other in any small issue also. So basically these things led to the Cold War era, and this Cold War stuff happened for a very long time, from 1945 to 1990s. So it was a very long period that Cold War was happened. Now let's come to the next slide. I hope you understand how Cold War started and what are the things that led to the Cold War and why it's called a Cold War. Now next thing is key events and confrontation. What are the key events that happened during the Cold War era? Because it was a very long 40-50 year era. The first thing, a very popular thing that we all know, the Berlin Wall or Berlin blockade. Because Eastern European, the whole Europe was divided into Eastern and Western Europe. This Berlin Wall was created so that the Western European expansion or the US expansion was not going to impact the Eastern Europe. So this was one of the first reason why the Berlin blockade was created, and this was an attempt also so stop the Western power. So even though later on this Berlin blockade created a shame for the Soviet Union also, because with the Marshall Plan, with the US aids, the economic structure of the Western Europe emerging a lot, and a lot of new development was happened. On the other side, the Eastern Europe side, which was under the influence, or which was under, we can say, the control of Soviet Union, was not very developing. So the differences between the socialist and communist development was totally seen and witnessed by the whole world. So it's also created a shame later on for the USSR power. And this Berlin blockade, that's what is called Berlin blockade. And this Berlin blockade was fall when the Cold War ended. And this Berlin fall was very famous at the time. Even you can see the pictures on internet what is Berlin blockade and how it's fall. You can say the people themselves starting breaking this wall and replacing the material that make that wall at that time. So this is all about Berlin blockade. And the other thing is Korean War. What is Korean War and how it's important in Cold War? So the Korean War was happened in Korea in 1950s to 1953, but it's also a first major conflict, a non-conflict, we can say, of Cold War. Because in this Korea War, not only Korean were North Korea or South Korea were fighting against each other, but it also North Korea side, Soviet Union and China were fighting, or in southern front, the South Korea front, US alliances were fighting. So through this war, a direct clash or face off of North Korea and South Korea with the US and USSR was happened at that time. We can say this was the first front war of these countries, because North Korea getting held by the Soviet Union and China, because both of our communist ideology, and South Korea was getting help from the US alliances. So this also leads to a direct war between the capitalist and socialist ideology in that way. Even today we are seeing that North Korea was totally a totally authoritarian state, but in South Korea there was not that scene. So that time period, that Korea war decided the fate of today's North Korea and South Korea. So this was the first war where they came face off. And the second thing that happened after that was Vietnam War. At the same that happened in North Korea, or we can say in Korea War, the same thing we seen in Vietnam War also, because Vietnam was also divided between North Korea and South Korea. In North Korea, again the same thing happened. Soviet Union and Soviet Union from one front, and from other front uh, USA alliances. So it's also leads to the same sort of war that happened in Korea. From North Vietnam, Soviet Union came, and from South Vietnam side, USA alliance were there. So again in 1954 to 1975, in this Vietnamese war, both this big power USSR and USA came in face off. So this another thing also shaped the Cold War destiny. So this thing also impacted the whole Cold War scenario. And the third and very important thing that directly impacted the Cold War, and it's very important you to understand, that is Cuban Missile Crisis. What is Cuban Missile Crisis and what happened in it, and why it is called Cuban Missile Crisis? So this Cuban Missile Crisis was a very important episode of Cold War. This happened in 1962. And what happened in Cuban Missile Crisis? So what US Soviet Union, a socialist republic as you know, were very worried that maybe the United States of America would invade communist ruled Cuba, and they would try to overthrow Fidel Castro because he established a socialist government there. So for that matter, Cuba was an ally of Soviet Union, and it also gets a lot of aid from the Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of Soviet Union. So this they decided to convert the whole Cuba for their safeguard into a Russian base. So the a lot of installation of the weapon to put the USS aside and not able to USA to come to the area to overthrow the government. So this for the installation of the nuclear weapon, this whole scenario called the Cuban Missile Crisis. When these things came to know, or came to in the came to USA, came to know about all these things, so USA wanted to the US President John Kennedy reluctant that the Khrushchev must remove these missiles because it's creating a crisis. So, but the Khrushchev was not ready to do that. So this led to the some sort of crisis. Even some of us saying these things can lead to a nuclear war also. So it's a clash seem imminent, and that's came to know as Cuban Missile Crisis. So this is what that happened in Cuban Missile Crisis, and what are the whole scenario. And it's a very high point of Cold War, because a lot small effect, or we can say a small fire can change the whole scenario of Cold War. But later on, both the representative never wanted to accelerate a full war between these countries. So these things were come to an end with the agreement, or we can say without any full war. Allies who were involved in this crisis came to back front, and there was no full-fledged war had happened after this Cuban Missile Crisis. So this was the one important incident, and very, we can say, very important incident, Cuban Missile Crisis. And one thing you need to learn that, or you need to remember that the Fidel Castro was a ruler in Cuba, and he had a socialist ideology. Maybe question can be asked, then Fidel Castro ruled which area? Yeah, belongs to which country? So these are the major episode, or we can say key episodes that shaped the politics of the Cold War, or political games of the Cold War. Now let's come to the next slide. The formation of alliances. What is the formation of alliances and the nuclear arm race? As I mentioned earlier also, the Cold War era led to acceleration in the nuclear war armaments. So there is also a lot of organization and a lot of alliances and military alliances, we can say, starting happening. The first and very famous is NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that was formed in 1949. It was a military alliances between the USA, Canada, and several Western European countries. As collectively they try to serve and defense mechanism against the Soviet Union. So it's some sort of thing like both of these Western European countries or USA and Canada came together that if any of these countries attacked by Soviet Union, so all these NATO countries come together to counter the attack of Soviet Union. So this was the first and very famous. Even today, NATO had very importance. So this was the first organization that formed at that time. The second was in SEATO, the South East Asian Treaty Organization. It was a regional organization, or it was also, we can say, a regional defensive alliances that was created in 1954. So it's also involved the USA, UK, France, Australia, New Zealand. So this was the second organization. It's and the Philippines. What does it purpose? Why it's created? This organization was created to stop the expansion of communism in Southeast Asia, because the communist ideology and communism was expanding like a fire. Even in India, the impacts of socialism we see in how the even today a lot of socialist ideology, even as in youth of India, a lot of people influenced by the socialist ideology. So at that time also national leader were influenced by the socialist ideology. So it was in one of the danger for the capitalist USA country. So this organization was created to stop or to erase the impact of socialism. And the third one is the CETO, Central Treaty Organization. This organization was established in 1955. It was also a regional alliances to counter the Soviet influence in Middle East. Where it formed? It formed to overcome the influence of Soviet Union in Middle East. And the last one organization, Southeast Asia Treaty, to counter the influence of Soviet Union in East Asia. This one was created to counter the influence in the Middle East region. So it's include the UK, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, and Iraq. These are some of the very important countries that played role to counter the influence of communist government in Middle East. So these are the three most prominent and very famous organizations that formed during the time period. So with the formation of these alliance, you can understand what are the fear of in the minds of USA for the expansion of socialist ideology or Soviet Union. So this is all that's led to the formation of alliances during that time period. And the next thing is this nuclear arm race. So this rapid acceleration or a lot of a new armed military equipment, a lot of new nuclear weapon was started and coming into form. So these all things leading to threat to the human, not only human being, but it's also leading to a nuclear war in future. So this was one of the important thing, or we can say one of the things that happened. A nuclear arm race was started. If one country creating something or design something, then other day another country starting, or we can say one day USA making something, then other day USSR making something over the board. So this leads to an arm race, a nuclear arm race between these two big power. Now let's come to the next slide, the challenge to bipolarity and non-alignment movement. So you all know, and I hope sure that you all studied in earlier classes about non-alignment movement. What is non-alignment movement? This non-alignment movement was started because of the Cold War. The whole world was divided into two blocks, but some of the newly decolonized countries in Asia and Africa, or some small countries, do not wanted to join these two groups. So they wanted to remain non-aligned. So this non-alignment led to the non-alignment movement. And some of the very famous leaders who involved in it, first one is Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, and the second was Gamal Abdul Nasser from Egypt, and the third one is Joseph Broz Tito from Yugoslavia. So these are the very famous and very important leaders for shaping the ideologies of nine alignment movement. This was started in 1961. The first session, or we can say first summit, was happened in 1961. So this non-alignment ideology, one we can say one of the very prominent, a very popular ideology, and it's also giving a message to the to the whole world that even though these countries were newly independent, but it doesn't mean that they are not they are going to join one of the two big groups and going to be submissive anymore. So this is one of the powerful message given by these non alignment movement countries. So this is the one of the important thing you need to just need to learn that, or remember the fact that in Belgrade the first session was happening in 1961, and what are the leaders name who, and you need to learn the leaders name who involved in this, like Nehru, Kamal Abdul Nasser, and Joseph Broz Tito, and from which country they belongs to. Maybe there is some matching sort of question may be asked in the CUET exam. So these are the things you need to understand. Now the next thing is proxy war. These all things I already mentioned you. What is Korea war, Vietnam war, so and Afghan war. So a lot of things that happened in the whole whole world front, we can say. Even we can say that even though USA and USSR not fighting together in their own country, but they creating a fighting base the whole world. So they are not in indulge in direct war in their countries, but they are fighting in the different front, like in Korea front, in Vietnam front. So this way they are trying these wars. And the next thing is space race. So not only in terms of the nuclear weapon, a lot of technological race was also started between these two big power, because only these two has such economy to experiment, or for a technological expenditure they can spend that much. So the first country that started was Soviet Union, and Sputnik launched and as a first artificial satellite in 1957. It was an this invention really shocked America, and this led to an arm race between the USSR and USSR. Later on, USSR Yuri Gagarin, one of the first person, yeah, human to orbit around Earth. So these things leads to a lot of worries for the USA. Later on, America also started Apollo 11, Apollo 2nd. So from the USSA, it's also Neil Armstrong became the first person to walk on the lunar surface. So this kind of thing, or this kind of discovery leads to an arm race between the US and USSR. So we can say somehow it's very much better than a nuclear arm race that happened between these two big powers. And what is the next thing in this slide? The next thing is new international economic order. What is that? The new international economic order emerged in 1970s. Why it started is these new international economic order started because 1970s and 1980s there is a lot of countries, least developed countries, or even developing countries, a lot of African Asian countries witnessing a lot of crisis in economic front, poverty, malnutrition, trade imbalance. These are the very prominent issue in these country. So this led to an organization, new international economic order, that started advocating for the rights of or equality global concern system. This led to the promoting participation of developing countries in the international decision making, like for UN or World Bank organization or IMF. So these things started a new sort of economic order, a new international economic order for the promotion or for the interest of least developing countries or developing countries, for a lower interest rate loan were giving to these countries, a lot of financial aids with zero interest also granted to some of these countries. So there is a lot of new change started with these international economics orders. I hope you understand what I am trying to tell. Now come to the next slide. India and Cold War. India and Cold War. How India deal with it? we all know during the India is the idea of non-alignment movement very popular, that non-alignment movement become one of the very revolutionary, not we can say revolutionary, a very political decision that taken by Jawaharlal Nehru, that we are not going to align with any of these two blocks and we are going to be non-aligned, and that's led to the non-alignment movement. So because India was also newly independent after 1947, so how India could go and join one of these powerful group and going for war? So neither we have a political interest, nor as an neither our country has such an ideology, because as a foreign our foreign policy also reflects that we wanted a policy that was sovereign. We do not want it to be influenced by any too big power or any power that were aiding us. So this from this non-alignment movement policy, we are also given one message, that we are not going to be aligned by any these power. So this was the one thing that happened. But other thing also, that we are not saying that we are not going to be create any sort of ties or any sort of agreement with these country later, or India independently, a lot of agreement or a lot of friendship treaty happened between India and Russia, and later on India's USA agreement was also started. But after the independence, India has a more on socialist impact, because India had a good relation with Russia. India signed a treaty agreement in 1971 with USSR also. So this reflects that India somehow leaned towards the USSR, and Pakistan more leaned towards the USA, because Pakistan even joined NATO group also. So this was one of the message. And during later on, a lot of things in the development phase, in the economic plan also, USSR helped India to become self-sufficient, or we can say when we tried any new technology, the USSR always helped us, even in the nuclear ambition also. When India tried to do a lot of new technology in nuclear weapons, so USSR come in forefront to safeguard us in a lot of matters. So this friendship ties of India and Russia was reflected after this period. And the third thing that's happened was nuclear ambition. What was that? When the Cold War was going on, India conducted its first nuclear test in 1974, a very famous nuclear weapon that happened during the Indira Gandhi time period. So this nuclear weapon, first test of explosion of nuclear weapon in 1974, also called as the peaceful explosion, because it did because with this nuclear test, we are trying to show that India has a nuclear capacity, because already China done its nuclear test. So by through this nuclear test, India tried to show that India is a nuclear weapon country, but India done this test just for its safeguard. It's not going to first use it again any country. Even later on, its nuclear doctrine says that no first use, because it says that no first use means that India not going to use its nuclear weapon against any country. It's started these nuclear tests just to safeguard it, and just to for civilian use also. And when the non-proliferation treaty, NPT treaty, tried to be imposed by the five permanent member, India clearly negated that and called it a very discriminatory, that it discriminate the whole world, where five countries of the world would have nuclear weapon and other country could not have. So these are a clear discrimination between these countries. So the nuclear ambition of India also led a lot of issues in Cold War dynamics. So these are the things that happened during the Cold War phase. How India deal with this ideology of bloc politics, and how India came out of an independent image. So these things happened during that time period. I hope you understood whatever I had told you. So these are the things that happened during the Cold War era. Now let's come to the next slide. What is Arms Control Treaty? So there, after the nuclear weapon, a lot of new arms treaty was started. This was one of the cutting of one book. So like limited test ban treaty, nuclear NPT treaty, strategic arm limitation treaty, strategic. So these are the treaty were started and signed between the countries for the limits of the arm, and it's also let's call an arm control treaty. So these are the some of the very famous treaty that happened during this time period. You just need to learn the year which treaty was signed, like NPT in 1968, strategic arm limitation talk came into force in 1972. So these are the most thing you need to learn, which year which treaty was formed. And this is the whole timeline for the Cold War era, that how Cold War started from 1947 to 1991. So what happened in this Cold War era, we will study in further chapters, what led to its end and how this Cold War era come to an end. So in the further classes we will study how the disintegration of USSR happened and all these things, because this is the first chapter of your book. So in the further classes we will explore the other things of Cold War era and what this led to the disintegration of USSR that turned it into a Russia. So these things we will study in further classes, and these are the MCQ that I have framed. So you need to practice these MCQ based question. Through these MCQ based question you can get more understanding about this exam pattern, and you get what going to become in exam, you get some idea about the exam pattern. So these are the some of the question that I had framed. These even it includes some of the previous year question also. You yourself can check the previous year question from the website, how question used to be framed. So this is all from my side. I hope you understood these classes. In further classes we will study all the remaining things.